Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Multifunctional Riparian Buffers, a New and Collaborative Approach to Conservation. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am the Mid-Atlantic Conservation Policy Manager for the Appalachian Mountain Club based in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, as well as the coordinator of the Pennsylvania Highlands Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. The Pennsylvania Highlands Coalition, originally the PA Committee, was created in 2002 as a committee of the four-state Highlands Coalition with the other states of New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. Pennsylvania portion of the Mid-Atlantic Highlands covers roughly 1.9 million acres across 13 counties and is a state-designated mega greenway. The Pennsylvania Highlands Coalition is coordinated by the Appalachian Mountain Club and includes over 35 member organizations who work to conserve critical working and natural lands and natural resources in the Pennsylvania Highlands, as well as to provide GIS data and analysis to assist in prioritizing land protection efforts across the entire Highlands region. We support and advocate on behalf of projects proposed for Federal Highlands Conservation Act funding, which have led to the protection of over 919 acres in the Pennsylvania Highlands region. We also meet throughout the year to discuss challenges and successes in conservation, as well as work to develop and refine conservation tools for use across the Pennsylvania Highlands landscape. The PA Highlands Coalition webinar series is offered as an opportunity to highlight innovative strategies in land and water conservation in the Pennsylvania Highlands, connecting with experts across the Mid-Atlantic region and providing a place where their knowledge can be shared. This webinar will be recorded and made available on our website, pahighlands.org. I will follow up after the webinar with the link for that recording as well. Today's webinar focuses on the emerging topic of multifunctional riparian stream buffers. The PA Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, as well as the PA Infrastructure Investment Authority, recently distributed $1.1 million in grants throughout Pennsylvania for planting multifunctional stream buffers, which incorporate species such as nut trees, berries, willows, and others in buffer zones. This strategy helps to protect clean water and provide an incentive to landowners, a collaborative solution that helps to raise the profile of riparian buffers everywhere. Today, we are pleased to be joined by two experts in the field of multifunctional riparian buffers, Austin Unruh and Tracey Coulter. Austin Unruh is the owner of Crow and Berry Land Management, a firm specializing in designing and planting multifunctional riparian buffers. Austin started Crow and Berry Land Management in 2017 with two main goals. First, make riparian buffers easier for landowners to adopt by doing all the heavy lifting for them, including design, installation, post-planting establishment, and anything needed for a successful buffer. Second, design buffers that appeal to the interests of landowners, be they bird watching, hunting, or stocking their pantry with fruits. Along the way, he is developing markets for products grown in buffers with the goal of seeing land stewards able to earn an income while protecting the streams of Penn's woods. Tracey Coulter first learned the concept of agroforestry when her mother gave her a copy of The Harvester, a 1920s novel about a woodsman who made his living growing and harvesting medicinal and edible plants. The idea of farming the forest persisted, and after working many years as a purchasing agent, Ms. Coulter received a master's degree in forest resources from Penn State. She now serves as Agroforesty Coordinator in the Rural and Community Forestry section of the Pennsylvania DCNR Bureau of Forestry, where she works to strengthen working landscapes by building the connections among sustainable forestry, sustainable agriculture, and healthy watersheds. Austin and Tracey will each take questions at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time, use the Questions tab on the right side of your screen. Hit the plus sign to open the tab and enter your questions. I will collect questions to pose to our presenters during the break. Attendees' phone lines are muted during the webinar. To request to unmute your line, please hit the Raise Hand button on your control panel, and I will unmute your line so that you can ask your question or make a comment. So, without further ado, I will now turn it over to Austin. Welcome, Austin, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's see if we can get this webinar to work here today. Okay, can everybody hear me? Let's just make sure of that first off.
Yep, everything's good, Austin.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Margaret. Okay, so Margaret, thank you very much for the introduction. I'll add a little bit to that. So I started Crow and Berry Land Management last year, exclusively focused on streamside buffers and agroforestry practices that go along with them. The goal at founding was to provide very specialized services towards streamside buffers in the design, the planting, and then the follow-up care. And then I came in with the idea to design buffers that are actually attractive to various landowners. And with the goal of getting this very valuable and necessary conservation practice applied on a wide scale, on a large scale. I wanted to make the buffers more attractive to people so we could get more buffers in the grounds. And I'll tell you this to start off, that there's one main problem with buffers in Pennsylvania and in the region, and that is that there are not enough buffers. The reason for this are many, but one in particular is that buffers have not been presented in a way that has been attractive to landowners. Now, we know how to create ecologically healthy streamside forests. And we also know how to get trees to survive for the most part in those buffers. But really, that's only one small piece of the equation. We could have all the money in the world, all the trees, all the staff, and it would all be worthless without the landowners opening up the door of their property to a buffer on their land. So we can have all the resources in the world, but at the end of the day, in order to get a buffer on the grounds, we need the landowner to say yes. And that is the bottleneck that we are facing right now, and that DCNR and myself and others are looking to get through by thinking more creatively about streamside buffers and about streamside conservation. The key here is that not all landowners value the same things. Each person values things a little bit differently. And until recently, we've only had one offering to people. Here's a little analogy I'd like to give you. Now, this might be cruel and unusual punishment to show you a picture of something nice and tasty at 10:30 in the morning, right about when I usually get hungry, but there is a reason for this. So imagine that you are walking into a pizzeria with a group of friends. You're looking forward to your favorite pizza. Maybe you are one that wants your pizza piled on with veggies. Your best friend likes a meat lover pizza, and your cousin is a big fan of the sardine pizza. However, this pizzeria only offers one type of pizza, and that's cheese. Now, there might be people in your group that just love cheese, and that's all they want on their pizza, and so it's great for them. A couple other people in your group might reluctantly sign up for a pizza. They might reluctantly buy one and just go along with it. But my guess is that a large portion of the people in your group would just say, no, if I can't have it if I can't have the type of pizza that I want, I'm going to leave. And that's kind of what we've had in the conservation sector with riparian buffers, is that we've had mostly one main type of way of designing or creating buffers and offering them, presenting them to the landowner. And we haven't had these creative, flexible packages to offer the landowner that could be designed towards what they enjoy and what they value. So today I'm going to start us off with showing a picture of what the most common land use is of streamside areas. And then we'll take a look at what the potential solutions are to that, what the potential alternatives are. We'll weigh the pros and the cons to those alternatives. And my hope is that I will be able to inform you of the options that are on the table for the landowners that you interact with. So I'm assuming that I'm going to be speaking today with folks who come from the conservation nonprofit sector, who have connections with a lot of landowners, a lot of people in your area, many of whom are going to be interested in conservation. So I want to give you guys the tools to be able to speak knowledgeably with the landowners whom you come in contact with, so that you can be able to explain a little bit about what the conservation options are to them and what they can do with these streamside areas that are more productive, and also more ecologically sensitive and ecologically healthy. So this first picture it depicts probably one of the most common uses of streamside lands, at least in my area. I live in Lancaster County. We have very intensive land use. Every square inch basically is used in some way, because there's a lot of farms around here, a lot of farm families that depend on the land for their income. So this is a common streamside use. You have your cattle down in the lowlands, your uplands, you have crops on them, and then down by the stream you have your cattle. The upsides to this is that it's very easy. It's very simple. There's little or no overhead cost to the farmer. But the downsides are obvious, and we all know those. So the pollution, the lack of habitat, usually the grazing is not very productive, as the plots, the paddocks are usually grazed continuously. So the vegetation never has a chance to regrow properly, and it can also affect the herd health. Okay, so this is the most common alternative to the previous type of streamside use. This would be your typical crepe buffer, and the solution to that, the previous problem that we have, is we put fences up, we fence the cattle out, and we plant trees along the stream. Now this is a fantastic solution because we get all the low-hanging fruit. We've fenced the cattle out of the creek, so we've taken care of a major source of pollution to our waterways, and we've added trees which will shade the creek. They will drop their leaves, and those leaves will form the basis of the food chain in the creeks and in our waterways. And for the landowner, this usually comes along with a land rental for them. However, it's not a solution that fits for everybody. For one, it's not used productively. So in some areas, and I would say especially Lancaster County, or especially among plain sect landowners, they tend to be ones that rely very heavily on their land for their income. And any loss of land from productivity has a direct effect on their level of income. Another issue here is that we're often working with farmers who don't want to work with the government too much, or they don't want to have much involvement with government for whatever reason that is. And having a long-term agreement contract with a program like CREP can be scary to many landowners. And so oftentimes they'll just try to stay away. They'll keep their distance from getting, from renting their land out to government programs. So this option has its obvious strengths. It has very good strengths, and it is applicable to a lot of people, but it is not applicable to everyone. And usually when these buffers are put in, they're put in as a cookie cutter without much regard to the specific values of the landowner. And so even though they could be designed according to what the landowner has interest in, usually that design is very minimal, or their input is doesn't weigh very heavily. Okay, so this is what I call the high value buffer option. And this is really an interesting one for a certain small population. So this represents the highest use potential of a riparian zone. If you manage it intensively, these riparian areas with their deep soils, their high fertility, and their great access to water could yield really fantastic harvests of high value niche crops, including pawpaws, persimmons, pecans, walnuts, elderberries, hazelnuts, aronias, decorative willows, dogwoods, winterberries, mushrooms, all kinds of fantastic, highly valuable, highly nutritious crops. And for those looking to make a living off of a relatively small piece of land, while also leaving a positive footprint, this is a fantastic route. So the pros to this is that you're growing high value crops, when you can you can earn much more on a small piece of land than you could with commodity crops or grazing. The fact that they're highly diverse also means that they are ecologically restorative, ecologically diverse. And it is a great opportunity for gainful employment for a large number of people. And you could very well imagine earning thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars per acre in this type of land use if you did it well and had access to the right markets. But then you might say, why isn't everyone doing this? Well, because it's a lot of work. It would be a lot of work to manage this intensively. And the markets for the products are niche. They're not very well developed. So you can't just go to the local grain mill with your elderberries or with your walnuts that you've produced and get top value, top dollar price, or even sell them at all. The way that you could go with your corn or your soybeans. So the markets are much more tricky. You have to develop them, work at them yourself. They're also quite labor intensive. So this is a fantastic option. And as a for-profit productive buffer, it will almost certainly appeal to some people, but that'll tend to be a small section of the population, small section of landowners. There will be more people who are interested in it for their own use, for picking berries, for making pies, for making jams. There will be more of those, but for commercial uses, there'll be a small section of people who are interested in it for commercial uses, but this option, I believe, won't affect a large enough land base in order to make significant needle moving changes to water quality across our state. So I want to look at a couple other solutions that might have a larger impact. This one is what I would call a grazed buffer. Now you have to understand that a grazed buffer is not it's not a typical buffer practice that is recognized. You might also not really be able to call this whole thing a riparian buffer, but it's a new way of looking at land use. It's a way of looking at land use in a healthier way that creates a more healthy ecology, but then also creates a more robust economy. So how do you do that? So a grazed buffer Well, first of all, why would I look at a grazed buffer? We'd be looking at a grazed buffer because if you remember, grazing, low quality grazing, is probably the most common land use in riparian zones. So for a landowner who's already grazing, they're probably going to be reluctant to switch over to, say, growing elderberries and hazelnuts, because that's a whole new enterprise. That would be a ton to take on. But to switch over to a grazed, a healthy, thoughtfully managed grazed buffer, well, that might be more feasible because they're already grazing that land. And so how would you do a grazed buffer? Well, first you would fence the cattle out of the stream. You would have water available to your cattle away from the creek. And then you would fence off your pasture into paddocks. And you rotationally graze the cattle through your pastures so that the grass is allowed to regrow before the cattle come back onto it. And in the meantime, you can plant trees along the lines of your pasture. Now, these trees would have various functions. They benefit your cattle by providing shade during the warmest parts of the year. They offer the landowner a second source of income. So say you plant black walnuts. In 40 to 60 years, those black walnut trees will be harvestable potentially at a very high value. Or you can grow faster growing trees that will provide the shade, but then they'll provide a quicker return on your investment. Plus, all the leaves that are coming off of these are going to make their way into the stream, and they provide habitat while they are in your pasture. So this is a way of taking that very low value, grazed down stream side area and creating a land use that is very productive and very ecologically healthy and ecologically sensitive. So whether you would call this a buffer or not, I'll let someone else decide whether those terms are correct, but it is a healthy land use, and one that is potentially much easier to sell to a landowner because it already fits in with what they are doing, and it means an improvement to their bottom line. Another option for landowners would be to grow timber in their riparian zone along their stream. And you can do this in a way that you can grow short-term timber just alongside your longer-term timber so that you get income, say 15 years down the road and 50 years down the road. You can grow, say, a hybrid poplar and a black locust, which both might return you income at 15 years, 20 years, alongside your larger trees, your oaks, your black walnuts, your tulip poplars, and those are going to provide you with 40, 50, 60, 80-year incomes and provide great value to the land. Even if you don't live to see the harvest of those trees, they will be harvested at some point, and that will provide value to your land because whoever buys it after you knows there is going to be a harvest coming here someday. This option could also be worked together with CREP. You could put your land in CREP. I know several farmers who have put their land in CREP and they've wanted to put in trees that would be of timber quality. maybe they're unsure if CREP will be the right answer for them long term, or if CREP will continue to exist long term. Well, for those people, you're looking at a 50-year time frame. So we put in black walnuts and oaks and tulip poplars for them, so that if it was appropriate, that someday you could do a well-managed timber harvest in that area and get more value out of your streamside area than you might otherwise. Another upside to this is that most of the work of a timber operation happens during the winter, and most of the landowners, the farmers that we'd be talking with, their workload peaks in spring and in fall, and they have a good bit of workload over the summer too. But then during the winter, they have less of a workload. So this could be an attractive option to some landowners who would like something to do during the winter, who want a land use that fits in with their schedule. Now, this is the final land use that I'm going to talk about. And it is probably the one that gets people the most excited. I call this a trophy food plot. Riparian buffers are just great for wildlife. They're great as they are without any extra planning, because they provide wildlife with access to water. They can connect different patches of woods, so they serve as travel corridors along areas that often don't have much cover. So you're going to get wildlife in these riparian zones anyway. But what really attracts some landowners to conservation is the opportunity to interact with wildlife. So whether that is bird watching, or having trout in their stream, or hunting. And hunting in particular is what gets many landowners excited more than anything else. And this is an interesting point, where what is valuable to a landowner doesn't necessarily have to be valuable in dollars and cents. Oftentimes, what is most valuable to a landowner is recreation and conservation on their land, and knowing that they're doing well, and that they are providing habitat. And for some, maybe it's being able to go down to the back 40 with their grandson and hunt in the fall. And that can be extremely valuable to a landowner. Now, people are very interested in creating food plots. Well, a well-designed riparian buffer can be the most valuable forever food plot out there. You can design it to include plums, pawpaws, persimmons, crab apples, hawthorns, chestnuts, honey locusts, oaks, hazelnuts, elderberries, and more like that will drop fruits during the right time of year. They will provide browse for deer at other times of year. My personal favorite would probably be to have a plum, persimmon, and thornless honey locust food plot, because each of those has tremendous fruits or seed crops that are they're coveted by deer, and deer will come running from a long ways away to eat these high value foods that are dropping all throughout your streamside area. And this is a land use that could easily be designed into a CREP buffer. So then not only does the landowner get this high value hunting land, but they also get the land rental. And it's only a matter of designing the land to the interest of the landowner, to what they find valuable. So I've just gone over a couple different land uses that that can help with streamside restoration. And my assumption going into this webinar is that all of us are invested in the quality of our waterways, the quality of our ecology here in the state. But our streamside, the way that we go about preserving the streamside quality, the water quality, doesn't have to be limited to just work along the stream side. It doesn't have to be limited to those 100 or 200 feet right next to the stream. There are other ways of doing productive conservation where you marry the values of production and farming and land use with conservation, many times by integrating intelligently integrating trees into the agricultural landscape with a ton of benefits that can bring both to the bottom line of the farmer, but also to the ecological health of our area. And I don't have time to touch on many of those, but Tracey will follow up with more detail on other land uses. We call them agroforestry uses in her presentation. And Tracey is the expert on agroforestry when it comes to Pennsylvania. So what can you do? What are the takeaways for you from my part of the presentation? Now that you know that buffers can be useful to landowners themselves, when you talk with them, highlight that. When I talk to landowners, I never mention the Chesapeake Bay. I never mention the Delaware Bay or even the local streams or rivers. What I mention is what is interesting to you. I would stress this. Listen to the landowner. Understand what drives them. And almost certainly, we can design a buffer that cleans water and is attractive to that landowner. And only by gaining a lot of landowners and putting them all together and having them all say yes to conservation on their lands can we make a measurable difference. Now, I'm going to make a shameless plug right here for my business and tell you a little bit of the story behind why my business is named Crow and Berry Land Management. So the Crow and the Berry, they're two entities that would seem to be at odds. Because the crow eats the berry, you would think, well, the berry lost. But in fact, neither one of these thrives without the other. As you guys know, you are steeped in ecology. The crow depends on the berry bush for its nourishment, and the bush depends on the crows eating the berries so that they spread them and make the berry bushes increase. Without this alliance, without these two working together, neither one thrives and both suffer. So this is the type of alliance that we can make with landowners where originally they might think, streamside conservation, that's just for the bay. Riparian buffers, that's just for people downstream from me. It doesn't have any benefit to me. In fact, I'm losing land. But now that you have more of an insight, you know what options are available to landowners, you can say, no, this is actually going to benefit you more than anyone else. This is going to increase your bottom line or be valuable to your own recreation or whatever it is that you value. This is going to help you. Now, if you, at the end of this presentation, don't know if you can explain the workings of a well-designed buffer to a landowner, that is no problem whatsoever. In my mind, you only need to know that there are more options available to landowners, and you have to know where to send people. And I would say to you, connect your landowners to us, to myself, and to the folks at DCNR. We know productive trees, we know productive buffers, and you are the ones that have the connections with people on the land who might be interested. Think of those farmers in your circles who are moving towards organic production or towards grass-fed grazing, or who are doing vegetable production. Many of these landowners are going to be interested in ways to conserve the land while earning a living from the land. Think also of those landowners who love to hunt. A well-designed buffer offers unmatched ability to bring in deer, turkey, and more, all while providing year-round habitat. Now, those are the people that need to hear about this. I don't expect you to learn the ins and the outs of setting up a buffer. That's what I'm here for. And I certainly wouldn't try to learn your job. Most of what you guys do is way over my head and above my pay grade. But now that you know the basics, you probably have someone in mind that would be interested in a buffer that is tailored to whatever their interests are. And I'd say, please send them along, and we can move conservation forward. We can move the needle of water quality and environmental quality in our state. So to summarize the main takeaways here, streamside buffers are not just for the bay or even for the local creek. They are for the benefit of the landowner themselves. Buffers also can be tailored to be attractive to the landowner, to fit their values. Thirdly, only by getting a ton of landowners on board with conservation do we move the needle significantly with water quality in our state. And lastly, you are the folks who know landowners, who have connections to landowners. And myself and the folks at DCNR, we know how to design attractive buffers. And together, I think we make a great match. And that is it for me. I am going to send it over to Margaret, and then we'll move on to the next part of our presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Austin. Just a reminder, we will be doing questions at the end of both presentations. So I'm going to hand it over to our next panelist, Tracey Coulter. You see?
Show screen. Can everyone see that now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Margaret. As Margaret said, and Austin introduced me, I am the Agroforestry Coordinator for the Pennsylvania DCNR Bureau of Forestry. That's a mouthful. What's agroforestry? Austin's been talking about agroforestry through his whole presentation. I'm going to give it a little more detail, but when we think about our landscape here in Pennsylvania, much of the mid-Atlantic and northeastern region, we have a mosaic of land uses. And this image, if you look at it, you can see that, yes, we have forested land, we have tree rows, we have homes, we have roads, we have all kinds of land uses. But agroforestry is actually the act of integrating forest management, tree management with agricultural systems within the same piece of ground at the same time. So there are 5 primary agroforestry practices. Riparian forest buffers, and we've been talking about that, and we'll talk more about it later on in my presentation. Windbreaks, alley cropping, silvopasture, and forest farming. So silvopasture is the integration of livestock, trees, and forage on the same piece of ground at the same time. And each one of those elements is equally critical. The forest that you see here is actually a stand of black locust. These trees were planted intentionally, and 20 years later, the farmers opted to enter that stand to do a thinning, to allow the sheep and goats in there to remove some of the competing vegetation while they harvested those black locusts for posts. So they're getting the forage, the grass is growing, the forage and forbs are growing under that tree canopy. And in the meantime, the fiber is growing, and this particular farmer realized $1,500 an acre harvesting these trees to sell as fence posts. Black locust, as many of you may know, is a very rot-resistant wood. So first ran sheep and goats through this, and then later on, as the forage improved, he was able to move his Angus cattle into this same woodlot. And as Austin mentioned, in a hot day and you're a big black animal, having that element of shade is very beneficial. There are studies that demonstrate that animals that have access to shade produce more milk and gain weight at a faster rate. The key to this, and Austin alluded to it, is the ability to rotationally graze your animals. What we often see in our woodlots is animals that are allowed to loaf or remain in wooded areas. And often those areas are completely denuded. There is no forage for the animals to eat. Consequently, there is damage either through compaction or basically chewing to the trees. And so silvopasture is one of those practices that needs to be carefully managed by someone who understands the needs of the trees, the forage, as well as the livestock. Windbreaks are another practice. So when we looked at the images that Austin showed, many of these are already integrated into his design. But windbreaks, as you can imagine, are designed to prevent the flow of wind, to minimize it. I grew up in the Midwest where it was very flat, and people planted windbreaks primarily for either, of course, wind, as well as drifting snow. But here in Pennsylvania, one of the common uses that you might see, especially if you're in an area where you have a lot of large poultry houses, is planting windbreaks to capture some of the particulate matter that comes out of those big fans. And so these trees will capture the dust that comes out of the poultry houses, and then because they're deciduous or they lose their leaves, they're going to drop that, and the particulate matter is going to remain on site rather than be dispersed through the system. These windbreaks in this particular situation are called vegetative environmental buffers, and they can also be helpful in mitigating some of the odor from livestock operations. Alley cropping. So again, in Austin's images, we saw different applications, different multi-story cropping, if you will, of trees and products. This particular image is of a chestnut orchard, and you can see the trees. They're actually starting to flower. They've got catkins on them. But while those trees come into production, the farmer is growing raspberries in between those rows so that they can derive some income while the chestnut trees mature and come into production. So alley cropping essentially is growing a crop between alleys of trees. So you've got rows of trees, and they could be chestnuts, they could be persimmons, they could be apples. I've seen them in Adams County, actually, as the orchards have been rolled and replanted while the trees are maturing again. The farmers planting grains between the rows, or pumpkins. So there's a constant value for that land while it is seemingly fallow and waiting to come into production. Forest farming and foraging. So forest farming is essentially growing crops under the canopy of trees or a forest. And Austin mentioned a number of them, and one of them that we just talked about today, oddly enough, is something that we often want to avoid, is stinging nettle. It's something that grows under trees in our streamside areas, but it is a highly desirable medicinal plant. So what can you do? What else can you grow? Something called ramps. If you're not familiar with ramps, you may know them as wild leeks. That's another popular crop, but more commonly what we think about is things like ginseng or golden seal that have a high value as medicinal plants. Nonetheless, you can grow hazelnuts under the canopy of trees. There are a number of different species that will grow under a tree canopy. But you can also utilize the material. So you have a wood lot and you want to remove some of the trees that are not growing as fast as the surrounding trees. And this is something in forestry we talk about a lot, because you may have a large tree right next to a small tree, but they're both the same age. And it could be a question of the genetics of the different trees. It could be just a site issue. It could be something specific to that tree. So what you might want to do is go in and remove those less productive trees. We call that a timber stand improvement. And since they're smaller, they're often ideal for inoculation for mushroom production. So you can utilize this material that's removed and actually derive some income or enjoyment from those products. So forest farming, this is an image of items that I've collected over the years. We call it goods from the woods. And among those products, we have medicinals, we have mushrooms, we have decorative, we have reeds, there are chestnuts, there are some of you probably live in areas where you can actually harvest cranberries. They're pretty acidic, generally high elevation species, but that's something. Maple syrup is another very common product from our woods. Pawpaws are becoming more and more mainstream. You'll see them in farmers markets. One producer in southeastern Ohio actually purchases pawpaws and processes them into jams and jellies and ice cream even. So there are many, many species that can be used. Among the species in this image, we have shagbark hickory syrup. People will tap black walnut or make tea from sassafras. Elderberries, you can make wines, you can make jams. They're very valued as medicinal species. So many of these species will grow in your buffer. So riparian forest buffers, we've talked about them. Why does DCNR care about riparian forest buffers? And as Austin alluded, we're very interested and committed to increasing our riparian forest buffer cover by 95,000 acres by 2025. And this not only benefits, as Austin said, the Chesapeake Bay, the Delaware, the watersheds, the major watersheds that we have here in Pennsylvania, but it also benefits the localities where we live. Pennsylvania is a headwater state, but it's also our home. And for example, before this presentation, Austin was talking about in his part of the state, they got 3 inches of rain. The other day, we got 1 inch. And historically, our home is at the bottom of the drainage. Historically, with 1 inch of rain, our home would be encroached on by water, our basement would be wet. And so what we did is actually went in and created a vegetative sort of buffer capture area to keep the water away from our homes. And when you think about it, we're going to be seeing those kinds of situations more and more often. So on a larger scale, a riparian forest buffer is helping to reduce the velocity of the rainwater that we'll be receiving, the leaf cover, even if it's a conifer or needle-bearing tree, will help capture that water, slow and intercept that droplet and slow the velocity. So it will, in practice, help reduce the loss of your farmland, your soil, through erosion, but also protect your homes downstream. Again, why riparian forest buffers? Improve water quality, reduce erosion and flooding, as I mentioned, provide wildlife habitat and migratory corridors. As Austin alluded to, wildlife use buffers heavily. They create a screen through which they can move. I was just on site yesterday where the landowner happens to be a public place, talked about the buffer and how popular it was for bird watchers to come and look, especially during spring migration. And of course, that Chesapeake Bay goal of 95,000 acres by 2025 is something that we look to as a goal. And as Austin said, looking for novel approaches to making that a reality. And among those novel approaches is the multifunctional buffer concept. So if you look on the left is the Zone 1. So that's the unmanaged forest. And if you're familiar with the CREP program, that's sort of the essence, is you're going to be planting trees that are native to the region, native to Pennsylvania. And because of the interaction of those specific native trees with the macroinvertebrates that live in the water, and also the insects that feed on them, all of these things are interconnected. And so we want to maintain that first area, the area nearest the stream, as a native planting. The next zone, or Zone 2, we're looking at managed nut, fruit trees, and shrubs. And for our program, we're recommending hand, if you want to harvest, that it would be manual harvesting only. There would be no equipment allowed in there. We don't want soil disturbance and we don't want compaction. And then zone 3 would be something that you might want to manage for some crop that you could mechanically harvest. For example, woody florals. I think Austin mentioned red osier, dogwood, pussy willows, things like that. Or even switchgrass or willow for biomass could be planted in that zone 3. So one of the things Austin really focused on was greater flexibility. What is it that the landowner really wants? How are they going to use their buffer, and what will engage them in that buffer? One of the problems that we often see is that buffers are planted and the landowner walks away. There's just nothing to connect them to that buffer. They have other business to take care of, other activities they'd rather pursue, and the buffers subsequently fail. So how to connect, how to make that buffer a significant part of that landowner's values. So you can produce an income or harvest for personal use and still providing the ecological benefits. One of the things a landowner I talked to yesterday said, well, gosh, what we really want to do is just walk down along our stream and eat berries and be able to just harvest different fruits and nuts as they come into season. So that's precisely what we want to hear. We want to know what that landowner is interested in. And because it can be more closely adapted to different landowners, it works for a broader set of people. And then long-term maintenance concerns. Again, if you're engaged in something, if you're caring, if you're actively there looking at it, you're going to be more invested in doing the maintenance on that property. So we already talked about the zone 1, 15 feet, native species only, no harvesting. And these are some of the species that you could consider. So black willow, silver maple, honey locust, which is a great pollinator species, eastern white pine. White pine is a good species for providing what we call thermal cover. So in the winter time, when there are no leaves on the trees, those conifers provide protection for birds and other wildlife. Black gum, that has an edible berry that wildlife will eat, and as the trees mature and become older, they often form cavities, so they also are very good for wildlife, for habitats. Yellow birch, American sycamore, you've all seen them. They're an attractive tree and they become very large. Basswood, right now they're where I live, they're coming into, they're starting to blossom. They're another really good pollinator tree, as well as catalpa, and they're just glorious right now. If you know the species, they're the ones in the lower right hand. So a lot of these not only are attractive, they produce pollinator habitat, they're aesthetically pleasing, and you can derive some sort of product from them. So zone 2 is the next one, 35 feet, so additional 20 feet, 35 feet total. Those are fruit and nut trees, and shrubs can be included in those, and no mechanical harvesting for our program. And among these are service barrier amelanchier. Amelanchier is one of the first flowers, first trees to bloom in the springtime. It's also known as Juneberry because it ripens in June, so it provides fruit for humans and wildlife early in the year. Pawpaw Asimina triloba is a unique plant. It is actually a very tropical species. That this is the northernmost incidence of this species, and it's a beautiful screen. It's a beautiful plant, and really grows well in riparian zones. So persimmons, I don't know if you've ever eaten those, but you wait until there's a good frost, and then they're very, very palatable. American hazelnut, crabapple, black walnut, and common elderberry. All of these species are great wildlife species, as well as edible or medicinal for human consumption. So zone 3, again, is extending beyond zone 2 to 150 to 100 feet, woody florals and forbs and biomass crops, as I mentioned. And here we're allowing mechanical harvesting. So red osier dogwood, which has, as you can imagine or may already know, a beautiful red stem that's very, very attractive in the winter. High bush blueberries, wild hydrangea, pussy willows, witch hazel, which is unique in that it blooms actually in the fall and early winter. American beautyberry, if you're familiar with that, it has a very beautiful purple berry. Chokeberry, it's another medicinal. Raspberry and switchgrass. So all of these, well, yeah, these are native species that can be grown in your buffer. So multifunctional buffers, one of the things that Austin mentioned was CREP and the landowner's interest. This article and this image is actually from a farm in York County where the landowners worked with their technical service providers to design a CREP buffer that was going to be include plants that the family could enjoy, that were good for pollinators, that provided a diversity of habitat and a visual diversity in their buffers as well. And this particular couple has received awards and has hosted multiple tours to talk about it. The woman depicted here in English is actually a landscape architect. So she and her husband, who's a forester, designed something that really appealed to their values and is also working to improve the water quality to their family's homestead. Where did we learn about the multifunctional buffer concept? A lot of the information that we built upon was developed at the National Agroforestry Center, located in Lincoln, Nebraska, in partnership with Virginia Tech, with Katie Trozo, who was a graduate student at Virginia Tech, came up with this publication. Penn State is a good source for publications if you're interested in learning about specific crops, for example, high bush blueberries. So all of these publications and information are available online. If you were to Google edible florals or specific street side buffers. So moving on, I'm going to talk briefly about our PennVest partnership and the grants that are becoming available. Actually, the new grant cycle will be beginning shortly, and I just wanted to give you a heads up so that you can be prepared if that's something that you, your organization, or you know of someone would be interested in pursuing funding to support buffer planting. So the whole purpose is to provide funding to support increased efforts across Pennsylvania. So PennVest is just another source of funding. they've pledged $3 million over the course of the next, well, 3 years. So now we have 2 more years of this grant to help supplement existing DCNR programs. We want to engage more diverse partners in riparian forest buffer work. As Austin mentioned, we're really interested in for-profit businesses. We're looking at people that can make conservation pay. Where, how can we prove that actually this concept will work, and there are businesses that can grow from this government investment in our buffers? So small watershed organizations helping out existing landowners, and maybe thinking about how these landowners might derive some income or otherwise diversify their buffers. And just, as I said, determine the feasibility of multifunctional income producing buffers. And so there's an annual grant application 2017 to 2019. 1 million total, as I said, no minimum or maximum grant amount. There's no match required for this grant. Up to 5% of the grant can be used for project planning or administrative costs. And there's a 4-year grant contract, but the landowners' agreements are required, and it's required, I believe it's 25 years. So there is a commitment on the part of the landowner to keep this buffer in place for a length of time. But any organization or individual may apply for PennVest funding: municipalities, for-profit businesses, educational organizations, nonprofits, and private landowners. So if it's something that you're thinking about, the first step is a pre-qualification, because it is a grant. PennVest wants to ensure that the money is going to the best, most qualified, qualified, and 2 in need, if you will, candidates. So we have 2 different options. The first one is the P2, the Rivers Conservation C2P2 DCNR grants, but that grant cycle for this year is already closed. It was January to April, but there will be a new cycle beginning again in 2019. However, for the PennVest grants, the grant cycle begins again August 1st, and all applications are due by September 28th. So if you haven't already pre-qualified, the pre-qualification period is opening on June 18th, and that will close on August 31st. So if you haven't already pre-qualified and you're interested in a PennVest grant, we'll start looking into that. There's, as I said, for the PennVest, no minimum or maximum. For the DCNR grants, the grant cycle that'll be starting in the spring, it's a $50,000 minimum, and there's no maximum. However, that is limited by the amount of funding that's available. No match requirement for the DCNR grant, it's 50-50. And eligible expenses, landowner agreement, both of them are 25 years, contract length, and the DCNR are the grant managers for these particular grants. So the pre-qualification, you can read this: nonprofit, last 3 years complete financial statements. For private or for profit, last 3 years complete financial statements. It sounds onerous, but once you're through the process, you're in the system, and you can apply for multiple years. So eligible activities for this funding are landowner outreach if you're an NGO, buffer design. Someone like Austin would be may be interested in that. Site preparation. So a lot of the problems that we have with our buffer areas is that they're overrun with what we would call competing or invasive vegetation that have to be removed before they can be restored. Then buffer installation materials, plants, and then post-planting establishment. That is one of the really critical points. We plant trees and then we walk away and expect them to just grow. But because of that competing vegetation I mentioned, because the young seedlings need to be protected from rodents that will chew or deer that will eat them, they need to be protected. But more than anything is the vegetation management, making sure if you're using tubes that their tubes are upright and there is some oversight. So that can actually be funded through this grant. And then how to apply, again, I mentioned the pre-qualification is June 18th. The grant application portal is online. You need to know the location. You need the narrative information. So as you're preparing to apply, be prepared. What's the scope of the project? What are your qualifications? How much experience do you have with buffer implementation? Methodology and outreach. Have you already found landowners? Do you know where you're going to plant? And if not, how are you going to reach out to these landowners to get these buffers in the ground? Maintenance and management, how are you going to manage that? And how many acres? So we've set this goal of 95,000 new acres by 2025. And so we're looking at acreages as well as the quality and the diversity of the plantings and your budget. So how's the money going to be spent, and what are we going to get out of that in terms of implementation and acres on the ground? So the next steps, the person that you would reach out to is Kelly Rossiter. She's with our with our Bureau of Recreation and Conservation at DCNR. She is the grants manager. This is the application, so you would go to www.grantsdcnr.state.pa and apply for those grants. So if you have more questions, need more information, contact Kelly. Here's her number. Teddy Stark is our Riparian Buffer Coordinator, or myself. I'm, again, Tracey Coulter, and I'm the Agroforestry Coordinator. I work for the Bureau of Forestry, and here's my contact information. And that's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tracey. So if anybody has any questions, you can either put them in the questions box on the right side of your screen, or you can raise your hand next to your name, and I will quote unquote call on you and unmute you if you want to ask your question verbally. Okay. Jerry Griffith, if you would like to ask.
Yeah, hi. Yes, I was just wondering if we could possibly get the slide presentation, or I'm just wanting to know if that website has the same information about the application for the grants as you've shown in the slide presentation.
So yes, that website does have that information. You can contact any one of us that you saw there, but this session, I believe, is being recorded.
Yes, it is.
So if you have any questions.
Okay, we can access the slide from that then, the slide presentation.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Okay,
it's
thank
a
you.
visual and audio recording, and we'll make that available. I think it'll be automatically sent out to all the attendees about an hour after we close here, and then it will also be posted on our website, the pahighlands.org that I mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Margaret.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Oh, okay, so Greg Cook wants to know, where would be a good place to start for a local watershed association wanting to begin action along a particular waterway in their area?
I guess that question's for me. What I would do, so where are you located, if I may ask?
Greg is located up here in the Lehigh Valley area.
Okay, so a couple of things you can do. For DCNR, you can reach out to the local service forester. Every forest district has a service forester that's dedicated to reaching out and working with local communities. But the other good place to start would be your conservation district. The conservation district, so the Pennsylvania system of conservation districts actually were recipients of one of the PennVest grants from the last round. And so there is some funding through the conservation districts to implement some buffer projects. So you could start there. Again, if you have any questions, you can contact us directly. My number is on the, thank you, is right there. Well, my number's not there, but my email is there, and I can help connect you to those people.
Yeah, so feel free to contact any of us. All our emails are listed here. If you have any questions later on, or if you have anything you want to talk about a little bit further, we still have a couple minutes if anybody else has any questions. Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hand. So I think this might be a good place to stop. Again, if you think of anything later, please feel free to contact any of us and we can direct you to the right people. And the webinar will be available via the recording, both on pahighlands.org and through an email later on today. So thank you everybody for joining us. Please keep an eye on pahighlands.org and our Facebook page for webinars that are coming up, or any other events that we're doing. And we really appreciate everybody jumping on today. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.